Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we've got a fun one lined up. We're diving into a conversation from the University of Calgary. Someone sent it in and wanted our take on whether it qualifies as genuine street epistemology, SE for short.
Ah, always exciting to see SE out in the wild. For anyone just joining us, remember, street epistemology is about having those respectful dialogues where you challenge beliefs, but the real goal is figuring out how someone arrived at their beliefs. It's not about winning an argument or proving anyone wrong, but about understanding that thought process.
You got it. So in this conversation, we've got Francis leading the charge. And get this, he's tackling a hot-button issue, trans rights. He's got a panel with a whole spectrum of opinions. Sounds like the perfect setup for some good SE, right?
On the surface, yeah, definitely. Diverse viewpoints, a potentially controversial topic. You'd think it's primed for some deep dives into reasoning, but, and there's often a but with these things, just having different opinions doesn't automatically mean it's good SE. Gotta look closer.
Okay, intrigue me. How does this one unfold?
So they start off with the statement, trans rights are human rights. Simple enough, right? But from there, you've got folks on the panel ranging from a hard disagree to a hesitant maybe. Francis does the right thing. Initially asks them why they hold those views. Classic SE move.
Seems like he's on the right track then.
He starts off strong, asking why. But this is where things get interesting. He doesn't really challenge those reasons, like he'll take a surface-level answer and move on, or jump to a new point too quickly. He's missing out on those opportunities to really probe their thinking.
Almost like he asks the suspect where they were on the night of the crime and just takes their word for it. No follow-up questions, no digging deeper.
Exactly. If we're thinking about SE as a way to uncover those underlying reasons for beliefs, he's just scratching the surface here. And this is something our listeners can really learn from. Effective SE isn't just about asking why, but also about dissecting those whys, challenging assumptions, pushing for more depth.
It's about being that tenacious detective, not letting those vague or unjustified claims slip through the cracks. So give me an example. Where do things start to go sideways in this conversation?
Well, one that jumps out is when a panelist claims the trans movement is destroying lives. Whoa, that's a heavy statement, right?
Definitely. And a pretty bold claim.
You'd think so. But Francis doesn't really press for specifics. A more rigorous SE approach would be asking, can you give me an example of a life destroyed by the trans movement? How are you defining destroy here? Are there other factors at play that maybe contribute to these negative outcomes? What evidence do you have to support this claim that the trans movement is the main cause? You know, really getting into the nitty-gritty of their reasoning.
Without that kind of probing, it's just an empty statement. And it leaves us, the listeners, with a whole bunch of unanswered questions. It's like, hold on, give us something more to work with here.
Precisely. And this isn't a one-off thing. Another panelist goes on to say, universities are indoctrination camps breeding woke therapists. I mean, talk about loaded language.
Yeah, that's quite a statement.
Right. And again, it's just thrown out there. No real challenge from Francis. If I were in his shoes, I might have jumped in with, okay, what do you mean by indoctrination camps? Can you give me a specific example of how this indoctrination is happening? How do you even define woke in this context? And why is that a bad thing for a therapist? You know, really break down that statement.
You're trying to get to the heart of their thinking. What are they basing this on? What evidence supports their claim?
Exactly. It's all about holding those beliefs up to the light, encouraging some deeper thought. And it's not about attacking the person, but about examining the ideas. And this pattern continues. We then hear another participant claiming that being trans is a social contagion and a mental illness. Again, supercharged language. And again, no real challenge from Francis.
It's like they're throwing these really strong opinions out there without really unpacking what they mean. No real justification or evidence, and Francis is letting it slide.
And that's where it gets a bit concerning, right? By not challenging those claims, especially ones that could be harmful, we risk letting misinformation spread. A seasoned SE practitioner knows how to address these kinds of statements head on.
It's like there's this tension between keeping things polite and really digging into the reasoning.
Right. It's a tricky balance, and that's where the skill of SE comes in. It's about finding that sweet spot between respectful inquiry and a rigorous challenge. It's not about attacking someone's belief, but really encouraging them to think critically about what they're saying.
So maybe Francis is playing it safe, keeping things civil, but not really hitting those SE marks.
Yeah, maybe. And this is a great point to highlight. Just having a polite discussion isn't SE. There needs to be that specific type of questioning and challenging. It's a different kind of engagement altogether.
So for our listeners out there, when you're evaluating an SE conversation, don't just look for politeness. Look for those moments where claims are actually challenged, where those assumptions are questioned, and where people are genuinely encouraged to reflect on their own beliefs.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to keep looking for as we dive deeper into this conversation. Things get really interesting when they start talking about whether gay rights and trans rights are based in natural law. Like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah, that one threw me for a loop. I remember thinking, hold on, are we all on the same page about what natural law even means?
Right. And that's a huge missed opportunity for some solid SE. Instead of letting them just throw around this complex philosophical concept, Francis could have hit pause and been like, all right, folks, before we go any further, let's define our terms here. What do we each mean when we say natural law? Where does it come from, and how does it connect to human rights in this discussion?
Yeah, it's like everyone's playing the same game, but with totally different rule books. No wonder they're talking past each other.
Happens all the time with these big, loaded topics. Without clear definitions, people can argue forever and never get anywhere. That's where SE's power to clarify really shines.
So listeners, take note. If things start getting muddy, don't be afraid to pump the brakes and ask for definitions. It might seem picky, but it can save you a whole lot of confusion down the line.
100%. And going back to natural law itself, it's a tricky one. Throughout history, people have used it to justify all sorts of things, good and bad. It's not this neutral, objective truth.
So it's all about how you interpret and apply it. That's where things can get slippery, I bet.
Exactly. Which is why it's so important to dig into the assumptions behind someone's appeal to natural law. Francis could have really pushed them on this, like, what makes you decide what's natural? Are there any biases, maybe cultural stuff, shaping how you see this?
Now that's what I'm talking about. Give them a chance to really reflect on their own thinking, maybe spot some blind spots they didn't even realize were there.
That's the core of SE. It's not about telling people what to think, but helping them uncover their own thought process.
Okay, so we've got this natural law detour, or things go off the rails a bit. Any other moments where Francis kind of misses the mark on the SE front?
Oh, plenty. Remember when Rachel claims that there's no such thing as being born in the wrong body? He could use that as a springboard into a deeper discussion about gender identity.
Instead of just taking her word for it.
Right. He could have asked, how do you define gender identity? What leads someone to feel like they were born in the wrong body? What evidence would change your mind on this? Get her to really unpack her position.
Instead, he's just accepting it at face value.
Which is fine in casual conversation. But in SE, the goal is to go beyond those surface-level statements. It's about understanding the why behind the what.
It's the difference between just hearing someone's opinion and truly grappling with their reasoning.
And again, it's not about dismissing feelings. It's about recognizing that those feelings often stem from beliefs and assumptions that we can examine and challenge.
So it's not enough to just say, I feel this way. You got to be ready to back it up. Explain the thought process behind that feeling.
Exactly. And that brings us to another missed opportunity during the whole Pride Steps debate. So they're going back and forth about those Pride Steps at the university. Morgan says something about how displaying Pride colors so prominently might be, like, totalitarian even. And Rachel jumps in saying it's basically shoving ideology down people's throats.
Oof, those are some loaded statements.
Right. And again, huge GE claims, but Francis doesn't really push back. He could have used some classic SE right there.
How so?
Well, with Morgan, he could have asked, okay, what do you mean by totalitarian in this context? What's the connection you're making between showing pride colors and, like, actual totalitarian regimes? What kind of evidence would you need to see to change your mind on that?
And for Rachel, he could have explored what exactly she means by shoving ideology. Like, does she feel her own beliefs are being threatened or silenced? Does she see the pride colors as some kind of force, like they're making her think a certain way?
Exactly. It's not about judging her reaction, but about getting to the thought process behind it. Okay, you feel strongly. Now let's break down WHY.
It's like that detective work again. A good SE practitioner isn't just taking things at face value. They're looking for the clues, the assumptions, the connections that might not be obvious right away.
Spot on. And just like a detective, they've got to know how to ask the right questions to get those crucial pieces of information.
Okay, so we've seen a bunch of examples where Francis kind of veers away from those core SE techniques. Let's jump to that last claim, the one about how denying the existence of trans children is hate speech. Francis actually does a good thing here. He gives them the legal definition of hate speech in Canada.
Right, which is helpful. But then he doesn't really challenge them to API that definition. He could have gone further and asked, okay, how does denying the existence of trans children fit that definition of inciting hatred or targeting them as a group? What harm specifically do you think comes from this denial?
So he's giving them information, but he's not prompting them to really think about it.
Exactly. It's that crucial difference between providing knowledge and encouraging people to actively engage with that knowledge. It's like saying, here's the puzzle piece, now how does it fit into the bigger picture?
It's not just about laying out the pieces, but about making the connections, showing how they relate to each other.
You got it. And without those connections, the pieces just stay scattered, you know?
All right, so we've dissected this conversation, looked at Francis's approach. What's the verdict? Would we call this genuine street epistemology?
Tough one. It has elements of SE, sure. He asks for reasons, tries to keep things respectful, but to me, it lacks that consistent, deep challenge that's at the heart of the method.
Like they're dipping their toes in the water, but not quite diving in.
Perfect analogy. They're playing with some interesting ideas, but they're not fully utilizing those SE tools to really unearth the why behind the beliefs.
So for our listeners, I think the big takeaway is this. SE is more than just a conversation style. It's a deliberate, skillful approach to understanding beliefs. It takes paying attention, asking those tough questions, and being willing to challenge assumptions, even when it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And this conversation, even though it wasn't perfect SE, is still super valuable. It shows how important those SE principles are and reminds us that even experienced facilitators can miss those chances to go deeper.
It's a good reminder that we're all learning here. SE is an ongoing process. Always room to grow and refine those skills.
And for folks who are new to this whole SE thing, this conversation's a great starting point. Learn more about the method, practice those techniques, and discover how powerful it can be.
So keep exploring, deep divers. Read, watch, practice with friends and family. The more you engage with SE, the better you'll become at figuring out those roots of beliefs, both your own and those of others. Until next time.